Thank you very much, Tamina. We could have been colleagues, but I'm old, so the shift is toward the new and the young. But the advantage is I'm closer to Tan Sri's age than Tamina is. So I'm going to start with, because you ended somewhere and you know, when we learn the Malay language in school early on, it's about gajah sama gajah belaga dan kancil mati di tengah. So for the non-Malay speaking audience, so when two elephants go head to head, the mouse deer will, you know, be trampled in between. So, but you are very confident and you ended by saying that no, that's not going to happen to us, not going to happen to ASEAN, or even more ASEAN+3. So I'm going to give the facts now. What does this Trump tariff mean? Because this is supposed to be a fireside chat. So the fuel now is going to be the Trump tariff. So for those who might not have known, Wednesday, 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time of the United States of America, the CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, has started literally and physically collecting duties from 86 countries' imports. And the CBP has also already boasted that it has already collected more than 4.3 billion in tariff on Chinese imports, more than 2 billion on Mexican imports, and about 861 million US dollar on Canadian import. This is ranging from the ones announced even before April 2nd. So my first question to you on that, Tan Sri, give us the worst case scenario for ASEAN if everything goes the way Trump wants it to be. Because yes, we see the key strength that you have outlined, but you know that market, capital, and otherwise, they also work on perception. So, and the Trump machinery, we've seen pre-election, we've seen his success of the US election, and now we've seen him using that for the trade wars. It's very, very gigantic. So what is the worst case scenario if Trump gets his way for ASEAN and ASEAN+3?
Well, you know, anybody who can answer that question is way, way beyond my pay grade. The answer is really we are only at the beginnings of a major tsunami. I'm saying this, I hope it's going to not have too much collateral damage. But can you imagine if you are an SME exporting to America and you are a company and an SME who is buying from ASEAN or anywhere, either through, you already said this, you have to pay somewhere up to 25 to 40% cash to pay for the tax, the tariff, before you can import the good. If you are an SME that actually already forward sold your products, your imports, you definitely go bankrupt. Because your margin probably is 10, 15%, and at that level. So the cash flow, just the cash flow impact on people who are dealing with trade because of the tariff is going to be quite stressful, put it this way, okay? And that's why, you know, we are only beginning to see the beginnings of the impact as it gets implemented.
Okay.
In fact, what we have seen at the moment in ASEAN, obviously is a shock. There is an announcement shock. Then we will slowly begin to see the actual cash flow, you know, the investment shocks, you know, the delays in projects, etc. And these are issues that it is difficult for us to assess at this point of time. But we must psychologically be prepared for the worst, but prepare, you know, ourselves that how do we, you know, strengthen ourselves, which is the issue that we discussed today.
So the era of free trade is over, as you have clearly put in your slide. How have you seen the initial response of the ASEAN and ASEAN+3 leaders to the Trump tariff and the challenge to multilateralism in trade? And what would your quick reaction be? Because even at this conference from yesterday, we've been hearing it, starting from our Yang Berhormat Prime Minister and the ASEAN ministers that were here, they all largely said that they will negotiate, but at the same time, they want to build inherent local capacity, as in regional and ASEAN+3 capacity. But we do know, and if I can quote the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett in the US saying that they are managing a massive number of requests for negotiations, and this is challenging to go through. He's complaining that it's challenging to set up negotiations, and if we talk about elephants and mouse deer, wouldn't they negotiate according to size? What's the biggest to them most, and where would we be in that whole scenario of negotiation?
Well, you must remember, when I used the analogy of the war of the elephants, the mouse deer has difficulty negotiating with one elephant, but there are 3 or 4 warring elephants at right at this point of time. Don't forget that the European Union has already decided to implement the carbon-based import mechanism, which effectively is a carbon tax, on anybody importing. So, European Union is already thinking about, using those, and the Americans have, jumped the gun in the sense that they've just raised the tariffs per se. So the mouse deer, which ASEAN basically is, we're smaller, we have to accept the fact that the big guys will be clashing. We either get out of the way, or we just wait and see. But it doesn't ignore the fact that the Sankanchil has to have speed. The small mouse deer must have speed, must be nimble, must be flexible, right? Because doing nothing is not an option. Standing still is definitely not an option, right? So we just have to think very clearly, But remember this, when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled, but the grass will outlive the elephants. I mean, so we really need to be much more resilient and understand there is no more external help. We have to work with each other, we have to help each other, but self-strengthening is really the key.
Okay. Where were we, in your point of view, for ASEAN and ASEAN+3 before the Trump tariff? Because what we learned from COVID is, if we were hesitant about working from home, we had no choice with COVID. And now that there's another crisis being lit for the multilateralism and trade, do you think that what have been holding us back before? Because the size is there if we work together. Like 1,000 mouse deer against 1 elephant, we could probably win. But there were structural gaps before, and also policies. Now, with the Trump tariff, what do you want to see changing first and fast?
Well, I think, if you really think through this, what has happened with AI is the democratization of innovation, right? I mean, when I started using ChatGPT, every time I wanted to use more of it, I have to pay into another pay grade. With DeepSeek, I don't need to pay for quite a while, right? Which means that actually all of us, the faster we use actually AI to improve our own productivity, we will be able to compete. Now, the beauty about digital connectivity is that, we can actually connect through to the Middle East market, to the African market, through all the other emerging markets, and increase all this. So the more our trade ministers try to protect the free flow of cheap goods, small goods, services at the SME level within the ASEAN region and also connectivity with the other markets, the more important it is to improve our resilience.
Maybe the big corporations of the ASEAN+3 have a bit of an advantage. But as you have alluded to, the SMEs, the micro, small, and medium, which are the majority of entrepreneurs and enterprises, how do you think, because if they already have to fork out cash for the tariffs, and then they have to fork out cash for the AI access, and already the mindset that you mentioned, a bit of risk aversion there. So what would your advice be for those out there in the audience to really push up the SMEs?
We never question, myself included, right, mea culpa. I never questioned the old system in which every ringgit I spent, every dollar I spent, the payment system has to go to New York for final clearing before it comes back. I never questioned it because it was very easy, very friendly, everything's happy, right? Mm-hmm. Today, no longer. If I put my money in the banking system, I don't want to put it into a bank that says it can be frozen, it can be sanctioned, it can be whatever. So why don't we just trade with each other, right? And today with digital currencies, this is now completely possible. Mm-hmm. So to a large extent, you just heard it, this morning, the ASEAN QR codes has already enabled many SMEs to freely, send money, within ASEAN very cheaply and very fast. What we now really need to do is now rebuild the old system, which was basically designed in a system that was probably too complicated for the SMEs. It was okay for the multinationals, but we need to build more inclusive systems. That's a big challenge, but we can only do this together.
A chance for an ASEAN digital currency?
No, we don't need an ASEAN digital currency. I think the point is today, if a Malaysian wants to trade with an Indonesian, it's very simple. I trust you, you trust me. At the end of the day, we settle. What currency we settle is irrelevant. Okay. Right? We can use gold, we can use an external currency, whatever. But the local currency to local currency model actually is quite easy to build. With today's technology.
I have to go a bit of a scattergun approach now because I have less than 50 minutes now with you. You mentioned one of the big advantages that US have is the ability to raise finance and money through the capital market, and they have mastered that art. That's why, and we, to a large extent, is very bank-driven. How do we make something relevant tomorrow to change that today? Because we are the mouse deer, and our mind is very sharp. So what can we do really on ground to change that starting tomorrow and get that as fast as we can?
Well, I'm unfortunate I have no children, but I always look at it from the next generational issue. If you overprotect your children, they are not prepared for the big risks that are there. But if you really encourage your children to experiment, to try new things, they will create new things. So it is a mindset issue. I think, to be fair, ASEAN and Asia has been very conservative financially. We learned our big lesson through the Asian financial crisis. We learned not to overborrow, okay, right? But we did not shift out of borrowing into a equity, driven. What is equity? Equity is fairness, right? Islamic finance is largely about equity. It's about risk sharing. Yes. It's not about risk transfer, okay? So if we change our mindset towards a more openness to risk-taking and innovation, we will find new breakthroughs.
Tan Sri, high tech is high risk. A lot of capital needed. If we go back the time tunnel, 1972, I think, we started early compared to many countries, developed ones at that, in semiconductor. Is that a good example of what you've been saying? Because we had an advantage of time. We led, but we are not there where Taiwan is or China is now.
But we have many alternatives. We have oil, we have palm oil, we have minerals, tin, nickel, etc. So we were not focused on technology. Taiwan, Korea, Japan, with much less mineral resources, less resources, focus on technology, right? And in California, you must remember the giants today, a lot of them started in garages. It started with people who do not even finish their degree in Stanford or Caltech or whatever, and they just went out and created something. Why can't we replicate this in Asia? I don't see why not. And this is where we need to have confidence in our own self to be able to build this. And that means a mindset change in our schools, mindset change in our universities, mindset change in business, and also the government.
I like that you say that. And in my interview a few weeks ago with Datuk Four of Fireside, who invested $100 million into the IC Design Park in Selangor in Puchong. He said that when he founded Phison with 4 others from Kaohsiung University in the year 2000, and they were the first to put microchip controllers into the pen drive, the majority of the engineering students in Kaohsiung never wanted to be a salaried worker. They were all dreaming of doing an innovation and having a startup. ASEAN cannot claim to have that as a majority. Is that what you're alluding to the mindset change and education sector?
But you can't blame the universities. The university inherited the system from the West, right? The university system in Hong Kong, the university in Malaysia is government-driven. The government gives the grant, so the professors are more like civil servants. They take the money from the government, and they either do the research, they're free to do whatever research they want. How much do university people talk to the businesses? They don't get their research grant from the businesses.
Okay.
They don't get their staff from the businesses. Mm-hmm. You know, in America, a lot of tech people, you know, are adjunct professors in most of the universities. They teach at the business schools. We don't have enough interchange.
Yeah.
And so it really is a mindset issue. As long as we think that somebody will take care of the problem, basically, Mr. Trump says nobody's going to take care of a problem except yourself. Make America great again, and make Malaysia great again, make ASEAN great again, fine. There's nothing wrong with it,
Yep.
right? So we need to be 100% focused on what we now need to get ourselves ready for a very much tougher world.
So the need and imperative of innovation is more clear now than ever. Before, the ASEAN countries tend to build from their own national identities and then look at collaboration. Maybe now is the time for a startup, a technopreneurship startup, for example, having a coder from Indonesia, having another person from Malaysia, and then maybe someone from Vietnam or whatever it is. Do you see that happening? A more indigenous, ASEAN organic-based startup and ideas and innovation?
Well, I think, you know, we have started with our Gojeks and, you know, the Grabs of this. So it's not true that we cannot do our own innovation issue. It is a mindset change about risk and failure. Now, to a large extent, because ASEAN, you know, our region, we have been, you know, trained to be nice to each other. You know, we are very polite. We don't like failure. But in today's world, failure is a necessity before success. There is no such thing as success without failure.
Yeah.
Right? And what this tariff, you know, shock has proven to us, better be prepared to fail so that we can succeed in the long run.
While waiting for that mindset explosion, do you think the public sector have to take on more risk now through SOEs or whatever it is?
Everybody has to take more risk. But if we all take risk, we actually share it. Okay, people forget this, right? You know, to not take risk is a risk itself. You know, I finally, you know, kind of woke myself up to this. Doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not about somebody else take care of it. You better take care of it yourself. You know, I used to watch a lot of Hollywood movies. I loved it when the 7th Cavalry appeared on the horizon. Now I realize I'm the Indian.
Okay. Well, you might be an Indian from Sabah and, you know, the Bajau nomads. Okay. Having gone to Borneo in that joke, the rise of nationalism is not just nation-based. Even if you look at the federal concept of Malaysia, there's more cry for equity from Sabah and Sarawak, where you're from. How do we move all this together at the same time with all this complexity, Tan Sri? Because we haven't really settled the internal discussion, but now we have the fire lit by the US. And now we need to solve everything at the same time, not just one after the other.
Well, let me look at this from the lessons of history. The lessons of history that empires rise and fall from two things: external invasion or internal corrosion. That's the only two simple historical lessons we learn. If you are internally not cooperating with each other, You will fail when an external invasion comes. The external environment has now become much, much more complicated.
Right.
And it's time for us to have a better conversation internally.
Okay.
And if ASEAN is one family, this is time when we close the door and have our quarrels, but at least we remain friends.
Okay. Tan Sri, because of time, I'm going to do a rojak. I'm going to mix everything together into one question. I want to mix sustainability. I want to mix disruptive tech. So let's take data centers and AI. No AI without data centers. The experts have been telling me that one simple, stupid question I ask on ChatGPT or whatever generative AI is going to take this much water to cool one query. And imagine billions of queries at any one single time. So a lot of capital into data centers and AI, a lot of investment, a lot of resources needed, water, electricity. And at the same time, we are also trying to make sense of our adaptation to climate change and net zero. This is an opportune time with the Trump tariff and trade war to solve everything at one go. How do you think we should do it?
Well, it looks extremely complicated, but it is not that complicated. Put it this way, right? The world has always lived on energy, which is either fossil fuel, sunlight, or wood, or coal, right? Water, and food. Food is energy. And this is something that we have in abundance, except we are not pricing it properly. We have not priced carbon properly. So, once we begin to understand that we still have a lot of strengths, this is not something that is hopeless. This is not about fear. It is about understanding that we need to go back to basics.
Yeah.
Back to basics. So when you talk about standards, whoever decides the standards is the winner. But in today's world, the standard is no longer so clear.
Okay.
So a small country like Finland can innovate and be a world leader. Small country like
Estonia.
Switzerland can do it, right? Why can't we do it in ASEAN?
Can. Of course we can. Malaysia boleh, ASEAN boleh, ASEAN+3 boleh. Before I go towards the end, it's very obvious perception and reality is now the game also. And Trump knows how to play this game. He's got the ex-missionary behind him and Elon Musk and DOGE and everything else. Even though they have dissension between his trade advisor and Musk publicly, but the White House spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt, said, boys will be boys. We're going to let them have that discourse. Can we shift the way we approach risk, including in communication and debating and discussions and media reports and all these things, just like what Trump has shifted up for America, from your point of view?
Well, if Mr. Trump has shifted, why can't we shift? It's simple, right?
We're more conservative.
No.
Yes, we
are. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Media-wise?
Because, you think about it, right? We, in ASEAN, we lifted how many hundreds of millions out of poverty?
Okay.
In ASEAN+3, we have lifted billions out of poverty.
Yeah. In one generation.
In one generation. We have to, we move from colonialism to independent countries who can think for themselves, who have begun to work with each other, despite many people who says, you can't work because you're not like Europe, We don't want to be like Europe. We are ASEAN, a family. And families will have quarrels, but we're we move through our consensus. And so because we independently, work together in a very loose framework, we should be able to find our solutions. And I'm pretty confident we can manage that.
Wow.
It starts with us ourselves,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So the mindset change is not about changing the minds of Mr. Trump or anybody else. Nobody can do that. We change our own minds, and we decide our own future.
Control what we can, and we have good cards dealt to us.
Right.
That's what I say.
That's right.
Tamina, are you giving me extra time?
No.
I wish we could continue, but I do want to end with, thank you so much, Tan Sri. It's always a pleasure. 30 years, and this is my first time, thanks to SC and the organizers. I've never managed to get him while I was in the media. But I want to end with something from Sabah. In Sabah, they say, kita-kita juga bah ini. the closest I can get to, it's just us. We can do this together. So the message from yesterday until today, whatever it is against multilateralism or trade and open trade, if we work together, converge, collaborate, and partner and do innovation, take risks, shared, not just passing it, we will go flying colors, I would say, not just survive. Okay, Tan Sri said. So that's in Penang, that's yes. Yes, Mommy. Thank you so much to the organizer. Thank you, Tan Sri. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri Andrew and Kamarul. May I please ask that we take a quick group picture with the both of you on stage, if you would rise, and the photographers are coming to the floor.